All right, welcome back. We are MDEV1004, that's Mobile APIs and Frameworks, in the summer 2023 semester at Georgian, and it's week 4, part 2 of our broadcast and recording together. And let's get back to what we were doing with our MongoDB installation procedures, which are way down here. All right, so we talked about bson and blah, blah, and then how to do indexing, and finally MongoDB3. Okay, so this is where we were left off, and what I showed you guys was a quick way of importing, into your local database. What I did was I imported, all of the files from Excel. Okay, so all the documents that I have in Excel, I made it in Excel, converted it to a CSV, and passed it into our local database as a JSON, file. Okay, that's pretty cool. Let's talk about collections. So what I was doing was, you can certainly do, add your collections, kind of by hand, manually. And the way you would do that is like you would say something like db dot, let's say for example, in our case, movies dot insert, and then you could put all that information in one big line. We can certainly do that. However, I think it's much easier for us to do an import, but this is the way it would be done. Each field, again, you would have your property name followed by the value, so key value pairs, followed by a comma, followed by the next field and what that value would be. All of this encapsulated inside of a curly brace, inside of parentheses. That's how you would do the insert. And you could insert individual documents in your collection like this. Remember that collections are the same, like very similar to tables in relational databases. Relational databases, we have, kind of tables, and then in NoSQL databases, in this case from Mongo, we have collections. And so we have a collection of documents is what this thing is. So here's an example. If I wanted to find stuff, I showed you this, db find. And again, you can also show collections. And if you wanted to drop or delete the collection, we can just do a db dot whatever the collection name is, drop, and then it would kind of remove that collection. No collection, if you only have one collection in your database, it actually deletes your database too. All right, so this is definitely a way of doing that. Okay, let's get back to this. So way back here, okay. So let's talk about a few CRUD operations here that you would do with Mongo. And I want to quickly go through them here on the Mongo side first, just to, again, remind everyone how this is done, and then I'll go back into Express and get it done with Mongoose. Okay, so MongoDB CRUD. So that's create, read, update, delete. You could definitely insert a document by using the insert statement. You could also use update and save. Those are the 3 methods that you can use to add a document to the collection. Okay, and I talk about here how to do that with db dot whatever the collection name is, insert. We also can do the same thing with update, right? Update is a little bit more challenging, and I wanted to talk about why. So it's kind of like you want to do an update, and upsert means if you don't have the document, it doesn't exist, instead of updating, then it'll add the new document. All right, that's what upsert does when it's set to true. And so it's kind of the same thing, but what we're doing is actually using this upsert flag in order for us to insert a document when we're doing an update. Update is a great way of updating the entire document, and stuff like this. One thing that you can also see is whenever we do an update, there's 2 parts to our query. Okay, and this is something that is interesting for Mongo. The first part is this part right here, from the update, all the way down to here. So this open curly brace and close curly brace, what you're saying is, the first part is find the document that I want to update. I want to update a document with a user, a property that has a user of Alice, only Alice's documents. So I'm going to look at Alice's document only, okay? Okay, good. Now that I found the Alice user, then I want to update, a document for the Alice user, right, as an example, inside the collection, the post collection in this case, with the title of second post and the username of Alice. All right, so that is what we're trying to do. But if it didn't find the title second post, it's going to add it. Again, it's kind of a weird way of doing it for me. So that's why I like to use insert. Okay. One thing to note is inserting does not insert it in a specific way. MongoDB inserts documents any way it feels like. Okay, even if you noticed before, if I was going to go to my Mac, just for a second, and if I was going to look at the Mac, and if notice that the document, so here's, 8, 9, 10, right? You can see that if I was going to do a list, and if I said, kind of a db.movies.find.pretty, you can see that 3 is number 1. The first one it shows me is number 3, right? And then it did 7 is number 2. But I didn't list them that way in Excel. I did like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It inserted them any way it felt like, okay? So please be aware of this. When it kind of does this, it has its own indexing methodology, right? So you may not get what you think you're going to get in terms of how it's been put in, okay? You can also make your own custom ID. If I wanted to change this movie ID to an underscore ID, and I could specify 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I could. Caution, I don't recommend it. I recommend you using the object ID and not depending on the movie ID. That is not a recommended course of action, right, for this at all. Back to this. Okay, so that's the update method. The other one to do is you could insert documents with the save method. Again, another really interesting way. So db dot whatever the collection name is dot save, and then what you do is you put the whatever thing that you want there. Now, each of these methods have been put there for a specific way, and it says passing a document that either doesn't have an ID field or has an ID field that doesn't exist in the collection. This is another way of doing it with the save method. Okay. When I want to read from documents, that's create. So create is an insertion. I want to find. I use the find method for reading documents. I can find all. There's different ways of doing that. I can just find by itself, or I can find with curly braces. That returns all documents, all collection, all documents in the collection. I can also use equalities. Okay, so I can find a specific one. Again, what I talked about before was I'm looking for a document inside of the post collection, in this case, that matches this query, which is with a username of Alice, a user of Alice. Okay, if the document exists that has a user of Alice, one or more than one, it's going to return all of them that match that criteria. Okay, so that's one thing that it'll do. Okay, and query operators, you can also use other things, like for example, I want to find a user in Alice and Bob. So I want to find all documents that have a user property that exists in either Alice or Bob, right? That include Alice or Bob as their this array, okay? Which is kind of neat. You can mention a bunch of different options, which is neat because you can say, well, either it has Alice or Bob or whatever inside of there as a user. So I want to find all those the documents as well. All right, cool. And I can also say they must have both. So 2 things I'm looking for. So example, I want to find all documents that have the user property and has a value of Alice, and I also want to have a comments count that's greater than 10. That's how you would do that. Those are the 2 things for and. Okay. Okay, and then for or, it's like, okay, I want to find either the user that's Alice or the user that's Bob, and that's how you would kind of set that up. So either or. All right, so that's kind of how you would do the documents that you want. Updating documents, where we use the update statement, and the way that's done again is you would kind of search for the document that you want to update, and then you would not use upsert. You could say multi is true, and if there's more than one document that matches, this user Alice. Now we use, interestingly, a $set to only set one property to what you want. If you didn't do that, and if you just said the property itself and only one property, it would erase all the other properties. Right? So please be careful about that. If you only want to set one property in your update statement, then that's how you would do it. Again, this is all command line stuff, but I think it's important for you guys to understand the command line portion before you actually do Mongoose. And this is kind of a review. You should kind of already have done this, but just in case you haven't, that's what we're kind of talking about this. Okay, updating documents using save. That's another way of doing it. I'm going to skip that one. And then deleting documents is super easy. Again, all we need to do is basically say db.postRemove. That'll drop the entire document, deleting all the documents. I can drop multiple documents that match the criteria again, this criteria right here. Okay, so I'm matching removing everything that includes a username of Alice, a user of Alice, okay? And I can delete a single document where I can say, I want to remove a user Alice, and if I put true, that is only going to find the first one that it's going to remove, okay? So the first one that matches this that where user Alice exists, it's going to remove only that document and not all of them. First post. All right, so I would normally ask if people were in the class, any questions. I'm going to assume that you don't. Again, by the way, guys, for people who are not here today, if you ever want to book time with me, please book time through email. So say, Tom, I need to book some time with you this week. Propose times that you're available, and then you and I could sit down and do a Zoom call or something like that where I kind of get together with you one-on-one and help you out with any of the problems you have. Please do that before your assignment 1 has passed. Don't wait till assignment 1's done and go, I couldn't get assignment 1 done and I don't know how to do this stuff. Can you help me? It's too late, right? Assignment 1's over. Instead of waiting for assignment 1 to be done, connect with me earlier, and then we can kind of figure out, I can help you out to do some of this work together. Back to Mongoose now. So Mongoose was interesting because it's a Node.js module, and we're talking about Express like last week, and we need a methodology to connect with MongoDB. That's what we're going to do, right? And in order for us to do that, we need some kind of module that kind of layers on top of Node.js to do that. So someone's written this module, which is kind of neat. And it's one of the most popular modules that I use to connect with MongoDB, right? And here you could, first of all, do a install for Mongoose. And what we're going to need is some kind of URI, because we need some kind of connection path to connect to our database. That's what thing we're going to do here. Now, I can't really do this stuff here. I'm going to kind of take it live now at this point, right, to talk about this. One thing also we want to talk about in a second is understanding Mongoose schemas. So connecting to Mongoose and installing Mongoose is one part. It's just an NPM package for Node.js. But the other part is, what about those schemas? What are they? Well, remember, when we think about a model class for relational databases, that's kind of what it is. We make a model class for the schema, and then we're able to retrieve that data. One thing that we're going to need to do today is remember that we do not have a front end. We're only doing the API backend. It's going to return JSON data for us, right? And so we need a tool to help us out. And I highly recommend a tool like Postman. So here's Postman, right? And here's my Postman tool. Now, I've downloaded the tool. There are other options here. You can always do the online version, right, of Postman. I've created a collection called MDEV1004 M2023, where I'm going to do all my queries. But this is kind of what I'm going to be using because we don't have a front end. I just want to make sure the queries work where I do a GET request, okay, or if I do a POST request, how that works. Today, all I really want to do is get data from the database using Mongoose, okay? That's what I want to start off with today. So first of all, let's get back to what we did last time, if you remember. So last time, if I'm not wrong, if we did it on the desktop, so we did not do it here. Maybe we did it on the Mac. See what happens when you take, or maybe it's on on downloads. Let's check. And if it's not, it's gonna be on the Mac. I'll be right with you. So there's downloads. Here it is. So MDEV1004 ICEs. We want to make ICE 3. Okay, ICE 3. ICE 2, right, what we did was we made this little structure with TypeScript and everything else. I want to copy ICE 2 to ICE 3. So this is the new in-class exercise for this week. I'm doing it on the PC side, but you can certainly do it on the Mac side. It doesn't matter. It's the same. And I'm just going to copy paste. So it's going to make a copy of it here. And I'm just going to rename this to ICE 3. Okay, so that's the first thing. And what I want to do with it is I want to launch it in Visual Studio Code. So let's bring up Visual Studio Code here. And we're going to just launch ICE3 inside of there. There we go. And now that I have the modules for ICE3, let's change a couple things. One, my package.json file should say ICE3. Please make sure you do that. All right, so I know it's from you. The other thing it doesn't have is any mention, we didn't do this last time, of our Git repository. The way to add your Git repository here is to run in your terminal window down here another yarn init. Let's do that. So again, I'm going to clear. I'm going to do a yarn init. If we do that, oh yeah, I love when this kind of stuff happens. What happens when yarn isn't available? Well, one thing I have to tell you is that if I do an MVM list, I'm using version 20.2.0. In another class, I said, hey guys, let's use the latest version of our executable is 20.2. Let's just use, this is an example of where I can shift back. I don't have yarn for that one. I can just say nvm use 20.1.0 and switch back to, with a little bit of security clearance, the other version right here. You can see now I'm using 20.1.0. And if I do an MVM list again, you can see that here I'm using 20.1.0 now. I've made that optional. And now I have yarn. So I can say yarn init, because I never installed yarn with the other folks. And you can see it does the same thing. And the reason why I'm using it is because I can go through here and it says question repository URL. That's something that you can add in there. So repository URL is something that it normally picks up. And you can run that again, okay, if you really wanted to. But here it didn't quite pick up the repository URL because it's in a higher directory. That's what it normally does. We could put it in here if we really wanted to. One thing we know is that this is ICE3, so we're going to put this as 0.03. Okay, so safe. Now let's run this locally. So node modules, remember it runs locally, so I'm going to do something like use nodemon, and nodemon is going to run our project locally. There it is. And if I go to our browser and I go to localhost 3000, you can see that I got Express. But this is a problem, right? And this is a problem because I'm using a front end and I don't want a front end. What I want to do is I want to do a couple things. One, I want to connect to MongoDB. Okay, that's what I want to be able to do. And we're going to follow the steps together to do that. Let's do this first. Okay, so first of all, just like we said before, let's take a look at our app.ts. Remember, hey, I'm using TypeScript, and if you were here in the class, I would say, what am I missing? The thing that I'm missing when I'm using TypeScript is I haven't transpiled. I need to have that transpilation service up if I'm going to continue to add or use TypeScript throughout the entire time of my development cycle. Right? So first, again, pull up a command prompt, make it another terminal window. Again, whether you're Mac or Windows does not make any difference here. And I need to do it, I have to say something like either TSC minus W, all right? That's the watch task, or Control Shift B. If I do Control Shift B, I'm going to transpile. It's going to pull up a task, and I'm going to use the watch task to transpile. If I don't do this, that means I'm not transpiling, and any change that I make won't be accepted, okay? By the way, if I ever do that kind of stuff and I do this kind of task, take a look and see what happens with our other thing. You can see that this restarted, right? As soon as I started transpiling, it restarted everything as if I've made some changes, okay? Just FYI. And that's what the first thing that it did, okay? Next, now that we have that, let's take a look at that app.ts, right? And right now we have roots, and this is our structure. We have roots, and we have public, and we don't want to use public and after today. Let's see if we can get this done, right? We're using express static, where we're combining this public path, okay? And then if I look at the roots root, if I look at the index.ts, this is the main root, then what it does is it takes this and it res renders, okay, res renders. When I come here, I want another listing. I want another path, and the path is going to be movie list, the movie list path. That's what I want, okay? So if I was going to create another route for this, I don't have this yet, but this is what it would look like, router.get, and I want to create a path called movie-list, Okay, that's what I want it to say, movie list. And then I would need some kind of function. By the way, this function right here with a request, response, and next, right? What it is this is the logic for my path. This is the logic for my route. Let's make sure I get everything properly, which I did not. Request, response, and next, router.get. And what did I do wrong? Right? Oh yeah, that'll be okay. And you can see here that if I hover over these things, it says that it is a request of type request. That's what it is. It kind of picks up that we're importing Express from this. But this is kind of what I want to do. And right now I want to res.json. Now you can see that that's what I want. I want to return JSON data, right? And the JSON data that I want to return right now is a curly brace, just nothing. Okay, that's what I want. This is just my test. And actually I can put in there something like, test if I really want to. Notice that it doesn't like this. If I put in test, it needs square brackets, right? Some kind of thing that looks like a structure of JSON data or something. Otherwise, it won't know what to do. Okay, so for now, let's just put empty brackets. It's going to return nothing if I go to movie list. Okay, so let's put a save. Save will restart my server. And if I go back to here, and instead of typing slash, which is what this is Express, then I can do something like slash movie dash list, and let's see what happens. It gives me these curly braces. This is exactly what I wanted, guys, right? My movie list, okay? So I want to be able to do this, right? But I want to be able to get my data. I want to read my data from the database. That's what I want to do next, okay? But we need a way of connecting. And the way I'm going to do that first is let's set up in my a couple of new things. First of all, things that you should note, all right? This part in here, this function that's in here, right? What that is from the very beginning is a controller, okay? We want to kind of definitely separate this out in model view controller. In order for me to do this and to do it on the Windows side, on the Mac side it's not so difficult, but on the Windows side, things to note are Windows is not, sensitive to uppercase and lowercase. Uppercase, lowercase, it doesn't matter. It's not case sensitive at all. Which means if I was to rename this from a roots lowercase r to a roots uppercase r, it wouldn't work. It would just say, well, you already have what you said. You're not renaming anything. Okay? That's number one. Next. If I'm going to do that renaming, I want to create that model view controller framework, model view controller, where I have a models folder, I have a roots folder, and I have a controllers folder. Okay, models, views, and controllers. I don't have any views because we're not doing views in this particular case, right? But I definitely will do, models and controllers. Okay, that's what I want to do here. So first of all, let's add our new folders in our structure, the ones we're missing. So first of all, let's add in not in roots, let's add it inside of our, down here. This is where it's going to go. Another folder called controllers, capital C. Okay, this is our controllers folder. Okay, good. And then I want models. So again, back down here, click on this, call this the models folder. There we go. I want to change this to roots, right, with a capital R, but I need to shut down my server to do this. So I'm going to go back to here, shut down my server. There it is. I'm shutting it down, right? And then I want to rename this to roots, but I want to rename it smartly. Okay, so I'm going to right click here and go rename. Alternatively, you can press F2, right? So this is rename, F2. And let's rename it to something like roots Tom, something else, okay? Why did I name it Roots Tom? Because now it's a completely different name in the operating system that I had before. And now I'm going to rename it back to what I wanted, which is capital R Roots. This is the way you would do it in Windows. So F2, Roots. Now it's going to take. Why? Is because if I didn't do this, Roots lowercase r and Roots uppercase R is the same thing on the Windows side. Okay, that's a problem. But what this means is in my app.ts, we have to make sure, and it kind of knows, Visual Studio Code knows that this is roots, capital R now. Okay, public we're not going to use that. That's kind of like for now, but I will leave this in. But I want to rename this from public, lowercase p, to client, uppercase C, right? Well, that's easy because it's different names. I can just rename it directly. I can say this is going to be client, right? And if it updates, you're going to see that then app.ts updates to client, right? So that's that's what it should do, right? So let's just make sure that that's all closed up. And now it says, well, this should be roots, and this should be client. That's what that should be, okay? Save. So roots and client, right? Controllers. But, you know, even let's take it one step further. We know that roots, models, and views, and anything else should be inside of another folder called server. Let's restructure. So again, I'm just restructuring this part, right? This is again for in-class exercise 3. Going down here, and I'm just making another folder called server. There's our server. And I want to drag and drop roots, models, and controllers in there. So roots, models, and controllers in our server. There we go. Root, models, and controllers. Our app.ts is a configuration, so it should be in a config folder. So I'm going to go into server. I'm going to just make a brand new folder called config. And I'm going to drag and drop my app.ts and my app.js and my app.js.map all the way into my config folder. Here we are. Again, this is just restructuring. And then now that I've got that, make sure that my server.ts points to the right folder. So it's going to be /server/config/app. So that's going to point to in my config folder in my app.ts. My app.ts, though, it doesn't point to server roots. This doesn't make any sense. It's going to go up one level to roots and down into index. So it's going to go up one level, and it's going to go to roots index. That's how it would be from a pathing perspective. Client also is incorrect because this is outside of this thing right here. So we'd have to go up one into, from config, up one into server, up another one into client, or you could do a /client. You could do that, right? Which would take you into that folder. Again, I don't really like that. I like relative path. So it's like // client. That's the right way to do it. / goes up one to server, / again goes up one to client. Save. Server also needs to be saved. So all those things are saved. And then let's make sure that this debug path is ICE3. Save. There we go. And all those things are happening on the TypeScript side, not on the JavaScript side. Please make sure of that. Now, let's rerun our server with our new server structure. We've almost got a model view controller structure. We don't have the views folder because we're not handling views. We're only doing an API, but this is the first part to restructuring our app. All right, let's do that. Let's test it locally, and then we'll put it up on GitHub. So again, it's nodemon, and does it work? Okay, if it works, let's test it now on our localhost 3000. And if everything works well like it does here, we've restructured our app so it uses the new folder structure, right? Controllers separate, models separate, you know, all that stuff. We don't have anything in controllers yet, but we're going to do that in a second. All right, let's put this up. One thing we know is that empty folders on GitHub mean nothing. So let's put a git keep file. So I'm going to add a new file, right? We're going to call it a git keep for now. Git keep is just a temporary file we use where we have empty folders. Like, for example, controllers and models are both empty. We're going to use a .git keep file for this. There we go, save. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put this up on GitHub. So again, here I'm going to say git add dot. There it is. Git commit -m. We'll say added project files for ICE3. And then git push. And that'll push everything up to GitHub, just like we've seen before, okay? And to test that, let's go back up to GitHub, and let's see where that is. There's github.com, right? And we'll go look at Georgian. And you can see that the last thing I just did in our ICEs was I added ICE3. Again, you guys can see these files. right? So you can see that that's what I've done. You can see that there's client and server now. I've separated client and server. Server, you can see, has config, controllers, models, and routes. And that's the new folder structure that I'm using from this point on. That's what I want you guys to use as we go forward. And this is the new structure for in-class exercise 3 that you must have. Awesome. Okay, great. This is a great place that we've gotten ourselves into, but we need to add some additional things here. So I'm going to need some controllers, and I'm going to need some models in a second, and I'm going to need to update my roots file so that it incorporates both the model and the controllers that I want in here as well. So first things first, let's add Mongoose to our project. So to do this, I'm just going to hop back out to the command line, and I'm going to go and type in yarn add Mongoose, right? And what this is going to do is going to add a dependency, a project dependency to our project, which is Mongoose. Okay. So if I look at my package.json now, let's take a look at that package.json. Here it is. You can see that here I have Mongoose 7.21. This is nice. However, I need some code hinting here for using TypeScript. So I need to use the @types command. Let's see if that's true. So again, yarn add @types Mongoose, right? -- dev, because it's a dev dependency, and then press enter. Okay, and then clickety click, we have Mongoose, but you can see that the type definition library for Mongoose is at 5.1197, which means there's not a lot of changes between 5.1197 and 7.21. Or, here's the other thing we have to consider, is that inside of Mongoose, let's take a look here. If I go to Mongoose, so here's Mongoose, and if I go to @types, take a look. Mongoose actually has its own type definitions built in, right? So although I added it, I said I was going to add it, they've already included it here in types. And if I go back to my command prompt, right, a lot of times they'll tell you that. They'll say, warning, @types Mongoose 5.1197, Mongoose publishes its own types. So you don't need to install this anymore. Please be cognizant of this, because you may install other packages that you think needs TypeScript support, but they already have it in. All right, let's remove it. So again, it would be yarn remove, right? And we say @types Mongoose -- dev. And then, sorry, it needs to be remove the whole thing, right? And then it's going to remove that from our package.json, right? So remove the type definition library for Mongoose because we already had it. Okay. Next step. And I wanted to point this out to you so that way you'd know, right, which is pretty awesome. The next step is, what we want to do is we want to include inside of our server config app.ts, we want to start using Mongoose. Okay, we want to start using Mongoose. And we want to create that connection first. So let's go back to our documentation here and talk about installing Mongoose. So here, MongoDB, but let's go back to Mongoose. So I'm going to go to mongoose.js.com. This is the link that you'd need. I'm just going to take this link here and put it on Teams for you guys. As well as I'm also going to put it up on Blackboard, so you guys have that on Blackboard as well. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to go to web link, and I'm going to put that in here because this is what you're going to need to get some documentation. Mongoose link is what I'm going to call it. Submit. So you have that here on Blackboard as well. And the reason why this is really key is because Mongoose has a bunch of docs, and this is an example of where we want to require Mongoose, right? But remember, we're not going to use require. We want to connect, and we want to use some other documentation that we want to connect to Mongoose all together, right? So there's a quick starter guide. If you click on the quick starter guide, it talks about how to do it. Make sure this is not too big. It is pretty big. That's okay. So here's the installation steps with using npm. And here's us requiring Mongoose and so on. And what we want to do is we want to connect. This is installing Mongoose with just JavaScript, Okay, not necessarily with using it with Node, right? So just let you know. So this is the way it works. There's a quick start. And it says connections. So this is kind of an interesting way of doing things. So mongoose.connect is what we want to do, right? And we want to connect with a specific thing. Notice it says MongoDB, our path, so localhost, that's localhost, and the port, 27017, and then whatever my app is called. In this case, my app is called Movies, which is what we want to connect to, okay? So that's kind of our connection. We also want to provide some feedback for connections. We have some stuff that we can do that's in here as well. Error handling is what we want to do. We can do a try catch, right? Or we can do a mongoose connect, right? And then we can do a catch afterwards. This is the new way of doing it. If there's an error, we can handle that error after the fact, if we're going to do this, okay? So that's how we can handle errors. We can also do a mongoose connection on, right? Where mongoose connection is something that we can also try. Mongoose connection. We can create an event so that we can monitor when we're connected and when we're not, okay? And there's different kinds of connection commands as well. So if you scroll down here in the mongoose documentation, then here's the connect documentation, right? And then there's connection strings, how to do connection strings, as well as connection events. This is what we want, the connections events. So I want to do it when we're connected, right? I want to make a kind of output to the console. By the way, the console is going to go to our local console, not to the browser, right? I want to kind of prove that we're connected, okay? So let's do it. So back to Visual Studio Code. First, we need to import Mongoose, not Visual Studio, Tom, Visual Studio Code. So I want to do the same thing. I want to say, I'm going to make a new line here, import Mongoose from, and Mongoose is what I want, right? So this is the first step. Now this wouldn't work if we hadn't done, kind of the connection. And this is, we're going to say this is kind of our database module. Database modules. Up here, these are kind of like Express, and these are the other third-party modules that are required. We also want to do a connection, so we can say mongoose.connect, and then we're going to say the URI that we're going to connect to. Again, the URI, I use single quotes, and if you look at the connection string, they talk about it here, which is MongoDB : //. So MongoDB : //. Then the path, 127 in this case, .0.0.1. If we're connecting to MongoDB Atlas, this would be a path that we're going to be given by MongoDB Atlas, okay? And then / what we want here is the name of our port, so 27017, followed by the name of our database, which is Movies, okay? So that is what we need. And you can see here, that's exactly what we're doing here, okay? And then we don't need any of this other stuff for now. Okay, so that's the first thing. So that's our connection string. Now, our connection string, although I can put it here, would be nice if we had instead of another folder, a DB file that we can export our connection string, especially when we have multiple connection strings. One to the local connection, and one to the remote connection, okay? So what I can do here is make a brand new file under config, make a new file, and we'll call it db.ts, okay? db.ts, we're going to export default, and we're going to say that we can declare anything we want, where, actually, let's just do we'll say let, URI, right, which is what we want. So we'll say let URI equal to that thing that we just made here. So this is this big part right here. That's the URI. And again, this is also practice for you for using TypeScript and stuff like that too. So that's the URI. And then what I want to do is I want to export default and I want to do URI, right? So that I could do that. Or here's something else I could do. I can make it so that I can make an object where I can put URI is equal to URI, right? So now this is interesting, where URI is the property that's part of the object that I'm exporting, and URI represents the string that I have here. Two different things, okay? I could say also URI is local URI. I could have two, local URI and remote URI. Let's try that. So if I say something like, local URI, right? That's local URI. And then I could rename this to local URI, local URI. You can see it doesn't exist and I get an error, but as soon as I rename this to local URI, then this is good. I might also have a remote URI, which I don't have here. For now, let's just do let remote URI, if we're ever going to get there. That's going to be to our MongoDB Atlas. Let's just use nothing for now. There's nothing in there. And then we can add a comma, and we can say our remote URI is equal to our remote URI locally. All right. So that is a file where we're exporting our URI information, and I kept it separate in a configuration file as opposed to exposing it inside of my app.ts. So let's go back to my app.ts. And here what you can do is you can simply import that. So I can say something like, well, let's import db from db, but I want to go into our ./db. That's what I want to do, right? So that means I want to get my database from my database file, db.ts, right? And now, instead of using this like this, right, I can rather do something like db.localURI, which actually tells me as a developer what I'm connecting to, as opposed to just a string. A string might mean nothing to me, right? Okay. So save, that's the first thing that's going to do. So first it's going to try and connect. Then I want some kind of connection string, some kind of event to handle the connection. So let's do that next. So I'm going to say Mongoose. Let's do connection, right? Dot, and notice that there are different ones. There's on, off, once, a bunch of different things we can use. I want to use the on, so on, and in here it's going to have a string name, and I can kind of look at what happens when I'm connected, right? These are, now one thing it doesn't give me is the options here, but I want to say on connected. What do I want to do? I want to run a little function. So I can do definitely a little function like this, which is an inline function. And that little function is a callback function that says, hey, when I'm connected, output something to the console. So I could say something like console.log. And then let's use our template strings. So we can say connected to, and then what we want to do is $ curly brace, right? And we want to do whether we're local URI or if we're a remote URI, right? That's what I want to say. So I want to say, well, if I'm using local URI, then that's what I want to use. But for now, we're just going to say connected to Mongo. We're going to get to that in a second. MongoDB, okay? Maybe we also want to make it so that when we're disconnected, we also show that. So I want to say mongoose.connection.on, and we want to say disconnected. Let's see if that's true. And we're going to say function. By the way, you can use lambda expressions, or we can change these to ES6 functions, which are basically going to be like this. We said that this is also equivalent. We can use these, which are a little bit shorthand for using functions that are fat arrow functions. You might see this more often. So here we're going to say console log, and we're going to say disconnected from MongoDB. Okay, we don't know what we're connecting to, what MongoDB, but we're going to say connected or disconnected. Let's make sure the disconnected event exists. And again, you can get that from the events list here, if we're here. So you can see disconnected. Disconnected is going to be emitted when I'm not connected to the database. Okay. And if I press save, and if I go back to my thing, you can see that we're connected to MongoDB automatically. Why? Because we had the right path and we're connected. One thing to note if you want to test the disconnection is you literally have to shut down your server. So this is the server, right? And again, if I shut this down, you can see that we're disconnected from MongoDB. Okay, that's something that you can see that, okay? And then if I connect again, mongod, right? Then you're going to see that when we're connected again, it should say connected to MongoDB again, right? So here's something that you're going to see. Notice that, there it is. There's connected to MongoDB. It takes a second to do that, right? As it continues to pull. All right, so that's how that works, connected and disconnected. And we use that just for troubleshooting. So this is really just, events. So we'll say DB connection events is what this is. This is inside of our app.ts file. Okay, save. And let's put this up on GitHub. So we'll say something like over here, we're going to say git add dot. And we'll say git commit -m. We'll say added, database connection, DB connection. Git push. Okay, that's the first part. We're connected now to the database. We've proven that thing. Now what we want to do is we want to be able to get some data from the database. But in order for us to do this, we need a model. Okay, and whenever we do a schema, we want to create a model for the database. This is the movie. For each movie, we're going to have a database schema. Let's do that together. So first things first, let's add a new file. We'll call this is where we start before we do any other kind of thing. And we're going to call this the movie model, right? So movie.ts. There we go. And what we want to do here is be sensitive to the things that we need for our movie model. Now, one thing to note is back to our documentation. And I'm just going to go and minimize this a little bit so we don't have to see this. On the left, you see that there is a TypeScript support link right here. This is the TypeScript support for under the Mongoose documentation. There's TypeScript. And what it does is it talks about how to import a schema, model, and connect from Mongoose, right? We don't need to connect because we've already done the connection, right? So we've already done that part to connect. We do need the schema and the model. We do need that from Mongoose. Here, what they've done is they've created a little interface, and that's how you do it in TypeScript, right? And then what they do is they create a new user schema based on the interface. This is really great, okay, to use in this way. And then what we do is we create the user model, in this case, this is the user model, and then we do an export default of whatever that is. Yay, awesome, and that's how you would do it at the end. Let's do it the exact same way, okay? So let's do it the exact same way, but we want to be able to import schema and model from Mongoose. Let's do that. So back to this, we're going to say import, and then in quotations, schema and model, right, from Mongoose. Again, this is right from their documentation. And if schema is not spelled right, which is not, schema with a capital S, that's the first part, all right? The other thing that we want to do is, once we've got that, here, again, back to the documentation, you can see that the next phase is creating an interface. So one thing that we've done in other languages like C# or Java or whatever is we use interfaces. And so too for TypeScript. TypeScript uses interfaces, and it's kind of like creating a class without actually having any, there's no actual weight to it at all. Remember that there is no types at all in JavaScript. I talked about that last week that we were together. I said, even though I make types in JavaScript, there's no types. So when I make an interface and if there's types, it's actually empty. There's nothing. And to show you this, if I go back up to typescriptlang.org for a second, and if I was to go into the playground, and if I was going to think about class person has some weight to it, when I convert it from TypeScript to JavaScript, you can see that there's something there. But if I was to make instead of a class, if I made an interface, let's try this out here, okay, just to show you the difference here, okay? And let me bring this a little bit closer so you can see it. If I call this interface movie, right, and I probably would call it iMovie for the interface itself. And I did this. You can see that I got nothing, right? So what do I need for the movie interface if I was going to model this with you? Because this is the schema in a schema-less database for the movies. Well, we have an example of all the things here. Movie ID, title, studio, and so on. Let's try this. So movie ID, right, is one part we need. Movie ID is of type what for the interface? It's a string type, right? So that's what we want, string. Notice the capital, right? And then comma, and the next thing would be the title, which is a string. And notice on the right, it's not converting anything because these are meaningless to JavaScript. There is no type. But the great thing about this is iMovie will give us great code hinting that we're missing something when we're creating our model. Let's transport this just the way it is right now. We're not quite done. But let's transport this back to Visual Studio Code and put this in. So this is the next step. The next step is iMovie, and we want to make it of type string, right? And that's what we're doing here, strings, string types. If we look back at the documentation for a second, you can see that's exactly what we're doing, but we're making string lowercase s here, lowercase s, because that's what we want. What else do we want for a movie? We want movies, we want titles, studio, that's also a string. And we also have a genre. Now that, my friends, is not a string. That's a string array. So an array of strings, right? That's what we kind of want to say, right? Is that the way we do array of strings? A string array? We don't do it that way. How do we do an array of strings? So I want to do a string array, right? And again, if I go back to here, right? And you can see that we have different types here. And if I wanted to do a string array, to declare a string array type in TypeScript, let's do that. So string array TypeScript. How do I do that? And if you say TypeScript arrays, it takes you to the documentation, and it'll show you string array. All right, that's what the type is, colon string array, right? So back to this, colon string array, right? And then genre. So we're not quite done. We need directors, right? We also need writers, right? Those are string arrays. Actors, and we also need the year. Now this is a number, and we're also going to use length, which is a number, and we have a short description, which is a string. Okay, and what else we have? We have MPA rating, which is a number, and we also have our critics rating, which is also a number. Okay, so that's the stuff. Now again, things for your assignment 1 that you're missing. You're missing your poster link. Okay, you have to define that yourself. Okay, but this is what I've done here so far. I've got almost everything here, critics rating and so on. And this is the first, this is our iMovie, all right? I called it iMovie because I stands for interface. And if I go back to the documentation that it shows us, this is exactly the structure that it's telling us right here, okay? Next, we need a schema, all right? So in this case, the movie schema. Let's try this out. So back to this, we'll make a movie schema. So far we've got the interface, which is the movie, and then we're gonna get a movie schema. So we're gonna say, let movie schema equal to, and again, notice for TypeScript, you need the new keyword. Sorry, let's make sure I go back to the right place there. And let's just teleport back to that so I can just switch between the two. There we go. So that's a new schema, right? Now, what does a schema need? Look at all that stuff that it tells me that it needs, right? It needs some definitions. And you can see here that the schema, right, requires of type whatever. Well, we need the schema to be of type iMovie, okay? And once I have iMovie as the schema, that's the first thing, then I want to define all those objects, okay? Let's try this. I'm going to say, yes, it's of type movie schema, but we're going to make it so that it has different properties in here, and the first one that we're going to use is name. So we're going to say name, not name. See how it says name, or if I said Tom, how it crosses that out. It says Tom, I don't understand what you mean. It really means movie ID, and movie ID is of type string, capital S this time, because this is a MongoDB thing. Title, string. Now studio, string. What about if it's an array of some kind, and so it's a string array is what I need to, is the next part, right? That's what I'm looking for. Again, let's think about string arrays as a type for models. And if I go to models for a second, then models, this is under the Mongoose documentation. And if you're ever looking for, creating a model, or a schema is what I meant, I'll be okay. So it has, defining your schema, and you can see that right there, all you do is you create an array. So here is an array of, and then you have something like a string, okay? So a body, which is a string, or whatever. That's what I need. I need an array of strings, okay? An array of strings. And so you can go through here, and you want to do an array. How do arrays look like? So if I do a strings array, it's an array of string, which is kind of what I had before, okay? So that's how it looks. Let's go back to our model and put that in. So again, if I'm going to look at the schema up here, it'll be genre, which is an array of string. That's how you would put it together. And then directors, which is an array of strings. And you're going to do writers, which is an array of strings, followed by actors, which are an array of strings, right? Year. Now, this is interesting. So again, data points, so data types, so arrays. Let's go back out. Number, capital N, is the number. It's an array of numbers, or numbers. So that's something to put in. So again, these are capitals, right? Year is number. Length is number. Short description is of type string, capital S, right? MPA rating is of type number. And finally, critics rating is of type number. Okay, so that is our schema. So again, the model so far includes a bunch of stuff. One, an import, some kind of interface to define, to give us code hinting on the type of thing that we're doing here. We made a movie schema, and this is the first thing, basically defining what our header row is going to look like for every, document in the collection. That's what this does, right? And next, once we have movie schema and all this kind of stuff, now we need to make a brand new model. And that's the next step. And if you look at the documentation, back to TypeScript, right? So step 1, step 2, we make a schema. Step 3, we have a model, all right? And we're going to do, the model is going to be called movie, capital M. So again, we're going to say, again, let or const movie, capital M, is equal to a, like it says here, a model, lowercase m, right, of type iMovie, right? That's what we want. And we're going to call this the movie model, and we're going to use the movie schema. Okay? Nice? And we want to do an export default, and we want to export default that thing, which is the movie model, right? But really what we want to say is export default movie, where movie is the movie model itself. So this whole thing is going to export the movie model, right? So we're going to do that. We're going to say export default movie. Okay, what this is going to do is going to export the entire object is going to be of type movie model. That's what it's going to be, okay? Whew, right? And that is our model class for the movie. And again, I'm sure you guys have questions, but you're not here to ask, so I'm going to continue. So I'm going to say git add dot, git commit -m, we'll say added movie model. And then git push. So what this does is it adds the movie model to our project. We don't need the git keep anymore. We can remove it. So we can delete the git keep file from our models folder because it was just a placeholder. Okay? That's what it was. And just to test that everything is still good and nothing is broken, we should always test this because you can see that it kept on connecting and disconnecting from Mongo because as we keep on restarting our server, it does that. Nice. And that is our model class. Okay, let's take a couple minutes break. So we're sitting at 10:08. I'm going to take 5 minutes or so, and I'm going to hit the washroom, give you guys a chance to get some coffee or some water, and then we'll come back, and then I'll continue on with connecting to our local database and getting data from our database. Okay, that's the next part. I'll stop recording now.